This event is being sponsored by the Office of Civic and Community Engagement through a grant from the AAUW Honolulu branch in partnership with student parents at Mānoa, also known as SPAM, who work out of the UH Manoa's Women's Center. My name is Susanna Lee Kandikati, and I would like to acknowledge that I come to you as a settler on this aina, who now calls the aauw of Waimanalo home. I can currently trace my family's roots to Seoul, Korea. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the aina of Pili Pili, on which we would be gathering if in person, is part of the larger territory recognized by Indigenous Hawaiians as their ancestral grandmother, Papa Hanau Moku. I recognize that Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani yielded the Hawaiian Kingdom and these territories under duress and protest to the United States to avoid the bloodshed of her people. I further recognize that Hawaii remains an illegally occupied state of America. I recognize that each moment that I am in Hawaii, she nourishes and gifts me with the opportunity to breathe her air, eat from her soils, drink from her waters, bathe in her sun, swim in her oceans, be kissed by her rains, and be embraced by her winds. I further recognize that generations of Indigenous Hawaiians and their knowledge systems shaped Hawaii in sustainable ways that allows me to enjoy these gifts today. For this, I am grateful, and as a settler, I seek to support the varied strategies that the Indigenous people of Hawaii are using to protect their land and their communities, and I commit to dedicating time and resources to working in solidarity. Please feel free to use the chat to recognize where you are currently seated. Mahalo. Thank you so much for joining us today for this event entitled Anti-Racist Parenting 201, Continuing the Journey to Becoming an Anti-Racist Parent. I will be moderating today's workshop, which is the second in a three-part series on anti-racist parenting. This time we will be looking at the question, how do you continue the journey of doing this important work through evaluating your own racial perceptions? In April, we'll be holding the third and last part of this series in learning how to engage our kids in talking about race using books. Look out for more info in the coming months. It is my great privilege to introduce our speaker for today's event. For those of you who were with us in December, Adrienne is back to lead us in today's discussion. Adrienne Hidalgo Esguerra is an educator, mother, and founder of After Schooling Better, which provides support for Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC parents and caregivers at the intersection of schooling and parenting through a social justice lens. We recognize the importance of creating or being part of a community of engaged parents where one can share stories, resources, and experiences as we pursue together this ongoing work of parenting the next generation. And therefore, community engagement with breakout rooms will be part of today's workshop. Welcome, Adrienne. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share your screen.
Hello, everybody. All right. Hope that all looks all right for everyone. Thank you so much for that great welcome, Susanna. Appreciate UHM and Civic and Community Engagement and AAUW and SPAM for having me back again. It's an honor to come and share this space with you all today. So I'm Adrienne Hidalgo Esguerra, and we'll be talking about anti-racist parenting. We'll be continuing a conversation we started back in December. So I know Susanna just did a land acknowledgement for Hawaii, but I wanted to acknowledge the land that I am on. I'm calling in from a different location, and we can't talk about anti-racist parenting without first acknowledging this land. And our journey begins with the acknowledgement that we as settlers and displaced people reside on the unceded sacred land of the Ohlone Ramaytush people known as San Francisco. We're aware that the US began the conquest and genocide of indigenous people and grew its wealth from the labor of enslaved Africans. The effect of colonialism and imperialism are still present and felt in the lives of many. We offer respect to their ancestors, elders, and descendants today. May we learn to be better stewards of the land. And I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the recent rise in against Asian American community, especially our elders across the country and here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm residing. We stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and we call for solidarity across all races. And I just want to do a quick quote from rapper Ruby Ibarra. It's the dialogue with family and friends who harbor anti-Black sentiments that is going to be critical with this movement and critical in changing and combating racism. If you don't know Ruby Ibarra, look her up. She's a great rapper. So anti-racist parenting, what is this? So anti-racist, as defined by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi in the book, How to Be Anti-Racist, is any idea that suggests that racial groups are equal in all their apparent differences, that there's nothing right or wrong with any racial group. Anti-racist ideas argue that racist policies are the cause of racial inequities. And parenting, I want to be inclusive of everyone. You don't need to be biological, legal, or foster parent to understand the dynamics between the adult and the child in the process of teaching and learning about race. So when using the term parent, I'm referring to all the folks who create these sacred containers for children to learn and question and experiment. And I want to acknowledge also that choosing to learn about anti-racist parenting is a privilege. We want to leverage the privilege as a parent and caregiver because we hold a lot of power. Just a quick little bit about me. I'm mothering 5 boys, ages 25, 18, 16, 8, and almost 2 next month. The 3 eldest are my nephews and the 2 youngest are my biological sons. We live in a multi-generational home here in San Francisco where we speak English and Kapampangan. However, I am monolingual. The school to prison pipeline has played a role in my life as my nephew's mother was incarcerated and then she passed away after she was released. And we stepped into this parenting role in my early 20s with my partner and I. And I mentioned this because the way that we parented our eldest at 25, who's 25 now, is different than how we parent our teenagers now and how we parent the youngest ones. So I just want to reinforce that this is a really evolving, parenting is really evolving practice, and we go between surviving and thriving, and it's a really nonlinear journey. And I'm not an expert in this, but I'm an expert in my story, and I'm just becoming a little more comfortable in sharing my story now because I know parts of it resonate with people in different ways. Okay, I want to go into a little bit about a framework for anti-racist parenting. We spoke about this in the last session, but as I was doing some reading and learning and becoming a part of other parenting groups, this emerged as a good framework. So first, building relationship with yourself, building relationship with your child, and building a relationship with community. This is also loosely based off of a book by Trina Green Brown, who is an author and podcaster of Parenting for Liberation. You should check that one out. It's also a great resource. We're going to be talking first about how your upbringing impacts your parenting. And after each one of these sections, I'm going to pause and stop talking and allow for some interactive time in breakout rooms for people to share their stories. So please feel safe and empowered to share. But if you're shy or you're preoccupied because, well, you're like actively parenting right now and you're a little busy, feel free to listen in, but just please note that in the chat so we can keep the flow going for the folks who are in the chat rooms and the breakout rooms. One of my guiding principles that I really love: no history, no self; no history, no self. So we get to think a little bit more about our own histories. So in our first breakout room, we're going to talk a little bit about race. So when did race first come for you? What's your earliest memory of seeing the world through a racial lens? And I just want to share my first moments thinking about race. It happened, I think, in early elementary school, around 2nd grade. A kid on the yard asked me if I was Chinese or Mexican. I'm Filipino. And I was really confused by this because for me, I obviously felt like I was Filipino, but then it got me thinking about like, oh, what about the other Asian folks that I come to now know as an adult as the Asian diaspora? And I was trying to understand that us Asian folks are from all different countries with different languages, cultures, foods, accents, smells, tastes, assimilation, and oppression stories. And Asians are not a monolith. No one race is a monolith. But it took, as a younger person, it took me a while to figure this out because no one ever explicitly talked to me about race. And my sense of Asianness has evolved over the years, from considering myself Filipino American to not even considering myself Filipino American, like my young second grade self, to not feeling Filipino American enough in certain family and social gatherings, to feeling ashamed of being monolingual, to embracing my identity when I was finally being reflected back to me as an ethnic studies student at San Francisco State University, the birth of ethnic studies. So I want you to think about how your schooling and how your parents parented you impacted your ideas of um, how race has impacted your life and how you might pass that down to your children. So did you grow up feeling Asian or Black or Latino, Indigenous enough? If you're biracial or mixed, how did appearance impact how you identify? If you're white or white passing, how did that impact you in social spaces? And if you're adopted, consider maybe your birth parents or your country of origin and your parents and family who raised you. Did you experience cognitive dissonance of how you identify inside versus how society portrays you? How about your kids and their racial identity development? So let's consider those things as we join into some breakout rooms and we discuss this. And feel free to answer these questions, or if you just want to share out a little bit about your kids and their ages or the capacity in which you work with kids, feel free to do that. But I'll reminder, if you're not able to participate because you're preoccupied, please note that in the chat. There's power in bearing witness, but there's also power in articulating your truth. So I want to encourage folks to participate if you can.
Yeah.
Everyone else, welcome back from the breakout rooms. Hope you all had some fruitful discussions about your earliest memories of race, or at the very least, discuss dinner plans. We're going to dive right into the second part of the framework, which is building relationship with your children. And I'll be talking about, we'll be covering some anti-racist concepts for different ages and stages from toddlers to high school. So note this is really general. Sometimes the chronological age does not align with the developmental age, and you as a parent or caregiver or teacher or educator, you're the expert on how you interpret this information for your child or your children. So at the end of the section, we'll discuss what have you already done to start these conversations, these anti-racist conversations, what has felt good, what's felt bad, and if you haven't started, what approaches resonate with you. So keep these questions in mind and be prepared to share after this part, or let the group know if you choose to just listen into that next section of sharing. So I saw this on Instagram. I thought it was worth sharing out here. Follow Sylvia Duckworth and what is this, privileged? I don't know what that stands for, but and that other IG account. So we already might be saying these racism interrupters in our own personal professional lives, but let's shift to start teaching our kids to say these race interrupters. Like, I find that offensive. Help me understand your thinking. I'm sorry, what? I'm not comfortable with that. That's not funny. We don't say things like that here. I didn't realize you think that. That's not okay with me. You just said, what you just said is harmful. So we might already be saying this, but let's get our kids to be comfortable saying these things too. In the next slides, the examples that I'm going to be sharing in this section are from the book Raising Anti-Racist Kids by Rebecca Guynap. And she is a religious educator and a mom, and it's a guide written originally for parents of white children, and I'm going to read it and share it through my lens as a non-white parent. So take it with a grain of salt. All right, so toddlers. Right now, toddlers are learning how language for naming things. And in the last session in December, we talked about naming skin color and racial categories, whiteness as normal, and cross-racial childcare and play groups. For this time, we're going to be talking about looking for images in books and images of people of color engaging in everyday activities, because toddlers are really interested in everyday aspects of life. And we want kids to respect and appreciate other cultures and not see them as fascinating or exotic. We also want the main characters of books to be people of color and not just their sidekicks or the comedic relief, like in a lot of movies. Check out the book recs that I have down here on the slide. We want to look for books with different kinds of families. Kids often get these ideas that kids are supposed to match their parents in terms of skin tone. And when we read, we can point out that some families match in skin tone while others don't. So, and we just want to remind them that love is what makes a family. We also want to label countries and cultures. So if a story takes place in another country, or you have art or objects in your home from another culture, tell them where it's from. It might feel kind of silly to say to a 2-year-old, like, this song is from Thailand, but gradually it begins to build cross-cultural understanding and the idea that there are many cultures and we appreciate different aspects of all these cultures and countries. We also want to observe global games and toys that picture people of color dressed in the past. Examples of these images are Chinese folks in rice paddy hats, Native Americans with headdresses and teepees around them. We want to focus on present day because these people are still here. For Native Americans, there's hundreds of federally recognized nations, and by perpetuating these images, they get lumped into one culture, this monolith idea. And if you ask pretty much any small kid, like, where do Native American people live, they'll likely say TP. So we want to counter these harmful narratives. And what if you feel like you've made a mistake already? It's not if, it's when. When will we make a racist mistake? Because none of us are perfect, myself included. Like I said, the way that I raised my eldest, who's 25 now, and my level of consciousness has shifted and changed over the years. Because we're all shaped by racism. So it's inevitable we'll make a mistake and we need to give ourselves grace for that. It's valuable for kids to see adults make mistakes and learn from them. So if you make a mistake by perpetuating a racist stereotype, you can simply explain to your toddler or any age kiddo that, what you learned about the racist stereotype, how you learned it, and what you're choosing or why you're choosing not to continue it. Preschoolers. So preschoolers, they're learning to categorize people. They love to put things into categories. In the last session, we talked about responding to biased remarks and introduction to proper ethnic and racial labels. This time, we're going to talk about how do you talk about racism with little kids and talking about people's names and what if the teacher calls home. So you don't need to sit down a 4 to 5-year-old and give them some sort of extended formal lesson on racism. I mean, like, you totally could, but you don't have to. But you shouldn't be afraid to use the word racism when it applies to an appropriate situation, when racism is indeed what's happening. Preschool age kids, you want to keep the conversation in the present rather than the past. This age can't distinguish between recent past, like yesterday, and long ago past, like 150 years ago. So explaining racism through the lens of enslavement can be confusing for preschoolers. So an example of how to explain racism to preschoolers that they might understand could be many kids' books that are about big groups of people or schools or communities, and you see that the characters are all white. We can ask kids, do the people in this book look like people you know? Who else needs to be included in this book? Those are some tangible things you can ask preschoolers. Also, you want to learn how to say somebody's name correctly. They're going to be entering a lot of new social situations and learning, meeting a lot of new people. And you want to learn from the beginning how to pronounce the names correctly. The book, The Name Jar, is a great book to learn with that. And I did Google how to pronounce the author's name and the character in that book, which is about pronouncing name correctly. So I recommend you do that. And ideally, anti-racist parents were proactive about talking about being friends with folks of different races, but sometimes we're caught off guard by comments that the kids say, or if the school calls because of something they said, or maybe a kid in their class said something. Maybe somebody said, "You can't play with us because you have dark skin." So our initial reaction might be shame or embarrassment, but we don't want to pass that shame and embarrassment to the kids. If something happens in school or in a play group or something like that, you want to listen Ask questions to understand what happened. And without emotion, explain to the child what the teacher or the parent, whoever was in charge there, just explain to them what was described. And you want to set a firm limit. Tell kids it's never okay to tease or refuse to play with someone because of things that make them who they are. It might have been a misstep on their end, but you don't want to make them feel bad about it, but set that hard limit. And you want to be specific about what that means, right? We're not, things that make people who they are is really broad. You want to be specific and say skin color, language, gender, ableism, right? If you're able-bodied or you're disabled. We want to try to figure out what else is behind the behavior of the kid who expressed bias. Did they hear this from other adults who are saying this around them? Maybe this kid is anxious and they're learning how to approach other kids and they're not sure how to do that yet. And then finally, we want to spend time with kids and adults of other races. You can't, no matter how well crafted your conversations are, you can't replace these meaningful relationships. Elementary school. They're learning the impact of racism on society. And then in the last session, we talked about race is not biologically real, but it's socially real. And we talked again about cross-racial friendships. In this session, we're going to talk about defining racism, and racism is not a slur, or racist, not a slur, and complex versions of history. So kids need to know that racist is a descriptive term of particular ideas, actions, and policies that harm people of color, not a slur that implies someone is beyond the ability to change. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi says, if we understand the word racist as just describing someone in a specific moment, we realize that the same person can be both racist and anti-racist. Most people have both racist and anti-racist ideas. I think this approach is a valuable one when talking to kids and teens about racism. Because when something is labeled racist, we need to stop and evaluate. Instead of getting wrapped up in defending ourselves or someone else with comments like, I know in their hearts that they're not racist, we can focus on the particular comment, idea, or action. Is it a belief that hurts people of color and gives white people unfair advantages, whether that harm is intentional or not? If it's yes, then it's racism. So unlike preschool years, elementary age kids can more easily understand the difference between the past and present. And that means we can talk more about how race has impacted history. And in turn, that helps kids make sense of how race impacts the present. Younger elementary children are likely to see historical figures as primarily heroes or villains. As anti-racist parents, we need to talk to our kids about how history is complicated. Many of the same people our children have been told are heroes also upheld racism in both their public and private lives. Telling the truth about historical figures lays an important foundation for children. They must understand how widespread racism has been throughout our history and how persistent it is today, so they can understand why it'll take more than personal change to dismantle racism. So giving children an accurate picture of history's leaders can help show kids that rooting out racism is not a simple matter. It reminds kids and adults that our work against racism within ourselves and society must be ongoing. Book recommendation is Nurture Shock, New Thinking About Children. All right, the tender middle school and high school years, love them. They're learning that segregation happens in schools, even diverse ones. In the last session, we talked about coded racist language, like the use of the word ghetto, and racist stereotypes from academic tracking. This one, we're gonna be talking about the term, that's so racist. So joking about things being racist that are not actually racist is widespread among teens. Kids live in societies that teach them confusing, conflicting messages about race. And they're told things like being racist is really, really bad. We're all the same on the inside. Talking about race is rude and offensive. Racism is the fault of a minority of individuals. It's backwards thinking people who are racist. So even though it's disturbing that kids turn "you're so racist" into a joke, it's not all that surprising. So kids joke about things that are clearly like a big deal to adults, but are hard for them to understand. So as parents, we have to disrupt this use of "that's so racist" as a joke or an insult. You can say, "When I hear the way you use the word racist, it makes me worried that you may not understand what the word means. Can we talk about this?" This opening gives us a chance to talk about the word, what the word racism means. So for adolescents, teens, you can also unpack the definition of racism that Dr. Kendi shares as a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity and are substantiated by racist ideas. The most important thing to communicate in this conversation is that racism causes real harm, real hurt, and real harm to people of color. Noticing race is not racist, and we can't undo racism if we can't talk about race. So when we jokingly label things racist that have nothing to do with racism, we send people of color a signal that we don't think racism matters. Also want to talk about white saviorism in movies, because our teens and our middle schoolers are watching a lot of movies. So white savior movies are usually based on true stories, but they exaggerate the roles that white allies played in ending racism. At the same time, they diminish the skills, strategies, and self-determination that people of color use to achieve freedom. They portray white people as heroes when doing what any decent human should do, while implying that Black people standing up for themselves is simply to be expected and not admired. To unpack this a little bit, I really recommend watching White Savior, the movie trailer. It was on the Seth Meyers show. Just YouTube that. It's pretty funny. Your teens might get a kick out of that one. Okay, now we're going to have another little quick breakout room, and we're going to talk about those questions I mentioned before. What have you already done to start these conversations about anti-racism with the kids in your lives? What has felt good, bad? And if you haven't started, what approaches resonate with you? And we'll put those questions in the chat. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, everyone back? All right. So we are going to start with the third and final part of this framework for anti-racist parenting. I hope you guys had a good chat. And again, like I encourage you to, like, if you feel like you connected with somebody, connect with them, connect outside of here. It's good to find some like-minded folks. So the third part of the framework is anti-racist parenting. As of anti-racist parenting is building relationship with your community. Quick note about co-parenting. Anti-racist work is not just with the kids and ourselves, but with other adults in their lives. So if we live in multi-generational homes, separate homes, or co-parenting or caregiving situations, including single parents who lean on the collective to help raise their child or children. Shout out to the single parents. We are partners and dependent on each other in child rearing. So communication is a long game. So consider, how do we nurture that relationship as well? Since we're leaders in our homes, and I'm assuming you're a leader of some sort, that's why you're in a parenting webinar on a weeknight. We need to guide the process of anti-racist parenting because it may be foreign or new, or you might even get some pushback from your other co-parents. And I'm in an almost 20-year co-parenting relationship with my in-laws, and I cherish them deeply, but we're not always on the same page, and getting everyone on the same page and compromising takes time. And I just want to highlight Adrienne Marie Brown. She says, move at the speed of trust. Her book is called Emergent Strategy, another book rec to look up. All right. So finding your village. You have a choice of the spaces you occupy, and you can choose the ones that are supportive of your authentic self. If a space or person or group is not serving you, exercise your boundaries and distance yourself or leave. And on the flip side, embrace the spaces that embrace you. That can be in real life or virtual communities like this one. Does the space you occupy instill a sense of hope? We need to be around hope dealers and get our daily hit of hope, because this is heavy work. We need to be around others who uplift us and not make us feel heavy. We got a lot of our own baggage to carry. We can't be carrying other people's bags. If you know Erykah Badu, Bag Lady, listen to that song. That's a music rec for me. And within these communities, find your person. Maybe it's your partner, maybe it's not. The person you can call or text or message to share your challenges and your wins, someone on a similar journey who can keep you accountable. Write this person's name down, commit to hitting them up, share something you learned today. And if they're your person, they'll be excited. And you want to find your book. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Someone else has written a book about what you are thinking and feeling. Adrienne Marie Brown says, there's a conversation in the room that only you and these people at this moment can have. Find it. You can find it in a book, find it in a community. Can browse my bookshop. I'll share the link at the end. It has all these book recs that I've been mentioning, or just do a Google search of words or ideas that you want to explore deeper and find a book group that goes with that. I know we were just in a breakout room, but I want to be mindful of time here and wrap this up a little bit. So maybe, do you think it'd be beneficial to go in a break room and discuss biggest takeaways, or if people just want to like put it into the chat? Susanna, what do you think?
I think we can give a few minutes.
Okay. Yeah. In breakout room?
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to talk about, what are your biggest takeaways? What are you going to do next? Who is your person? If you don't have a person, I can be your person. Welcome back. I all went through the wormhole. You're transported. Hope you had a good discussion of takeaways, the biggest takeaways. I'd love to hear what people's takeaways were. So if you're willing to just type something into the chat, I'd love to see what people are going to bring home with them tonight. It's tonight here in San Francisco. So I hope everybody grew a little bit more from this talk, and you continue to pay attention to your journey. So you continue to grow as a person and as a parent, but you pay attention to grows. Another great Adrienne Marie Brown quote. Here's my references. This information will be shared later. And if you want to connect, here's my info. You follow me on the IG, After Schooling Better. This link here at Bookshop is the books that I recommended today, and a whole slew of other ones. So if you're interested in that and decentralizing the power of Amazon and their books, and you want to purchase from local independent bookstores, you can check out my bookshop. You could do the QR code, or you could just do my book. You could just do Bookshop, and After Schooling Better will pop up. And if you're looking for more offerings, you can scan the QR code and get on a wait list for stuff that I'm doing, or just shoot me an email if you want to work together in the future, or if you need a person. I could be your person. Let me know. Susanna too.
Definitely.
I could put you out there.
It's fine.
But that's all for me, folks. I really appreciate you, busy parents, for taking some time for hanging out here with UH and learning about some anti-racist parenting. Susanna?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adrienne, for sharing with us today. If you have any additional questions, Adrienne will be available after the official close of today's event.